I'm Jeff O'Driscoll. For 25 years, I was an emergency physician at a level 1 trauma center. So I took care of the sickest and the most severely injured patients. And sometimes I saw things in the emergency department that science couldn't explain. Just a month before my 12th birthday, my brother, to whom I was very close, was killed in a farm accident. I didn't think it really had a big impact on me at the time. I was sad. I missed him. We did a lot of things together. But I didn't think it really had a big impact on my soul until 20 years later when he came to me. And I saw him in full form. He spoke to me. I knew who he was immediately. And he said, "You have to go talk with our mother because there's things she's never told you about my death." As you can imagine, that got my attention. So I went and I sat down, visited with my mother one beautiful day, and for the first time she said, "I always knew where you were in the house before Stan died because I could hear you singing. When your brother died, you stopped singing." And that was the first time I really realized how deeply my brother's death impacted me. A few years after my brother died, I got my driver's license, and like so many kids that age, I drove way too fast, never wore a seatbelt, and one night I had two friends in a car going down a windy country road in the dark, and I heard a voice. I felt it more than heard it. It kind of wrapped itself around me and said, "You have to slow down." I was in a really rebellious stage in my life. I wasn't inclined to listen to any authority figure, not my parents, not law enforcement, but I listened to that voice and I slowed down. I went around a corner and hit a Cadillac head on. There was a lot of damage to the vehicles, but nobody was injured. I think if I hadn't heard that voice that night, I might have died. And over time, I came to realize the voice I heard was my brother. That was the only voice I would have listened to. I listened to everything he said. And over the years after that, his messages became more frequent and more clear, and sometimes I would see him when he would come as well. I do at times think of my brother as a guide or a messenger or a guardian, but I don't think of him exclusively in that role because we're all guides and guardians in a way. Even in this realm, we're guides and guardians to one another. And so I've had a lot of messengers come to me, some of which I knew and some I didn't know. It isn't just my brother. On one occasion, for example, I received a message, very clear message, and I was instructed to deliver it to a friend of mine. And I asked the messenger, I said, "Well, why don't you just go deliver it yourself?" The friend was this messenger's brother. I said, "Why don't you go deliver it to your brother yourself?" And he said, he wouldn't receive it from me. So a couple days later, I was really uncomfortable in the process, but I was with my friend and I said, "Hey, do you have any siblings?" And he said, "Yeah, I have a bunch." And he started rattling them off, including one sibling, one brother who had passed away from pancreatic cancer, if I recall correctly. And I still wasn't quite comfortable delivering the message. And I said, I kind of resonate with your brother, the one that's passed, because I have a brother that's passed too. And I almost felt like he was close to me recently. And I shared the message without being quite so open about where it came from. And when I said it, he looked at me and he said, "Oh yeah, that's my brother." And I said, "Well, why didn't he come deliver it to you?" And my friend said, "Oh, I wouldn't have received it from him." A lot of people ask me about spiritual experiences, for lack of a better word, during my medical training. And for me, it always felt complementary, not contradictory. In medical school, I was learning about the physical body and how to take care of the physical, and I always had this other spiritual side that kind of moved in parallel but didn't seem to conflict with anything I was learning in medical school. I'd had enough experiences by the time I was an attending physician in the emergency department that I kind of felt more comfortable with it. And one morning I was starting a shift, I was logging onto the computer when I felt a presence over my shoulder. I intuitively knew that the essence over my shoulder was the soul or the consciousness of the person around the corner in the resuscitation bay that they were trying to resuscitate. There was a doctor in there was a whole team in there. I had no responsibility at all for the patient, but this presence asked me for help. So I stopped what I was doing. I walked around the corner into the resuscitation room. I was in scrubs and a white coat. Nobody paid any attention to me at all. I worked there. I might have been the department chair at the time. And it wasn't uncommon for another physician to come in and observe a resuscitation. There was one spot around the gurney where there weren't caretakers pressed up against the gurney. And I just walked over there nonchalantly and rested my hand on her leg because I'd learned by then that touch was really important. And when I touched her, she silently asked me if she could leave. She was unconscious, mind you. She was intubated. She had a tube in her throat. They were doing chest compressions. Nobody knew she was communicating with me. And I was stunned by her question, why she thought I would have an answer for her about leaving. But as I thought about it, the words came from some eternal place, and I silently communicated back to her, if you feel it's the right thing to do, if that's what you think you should do, I think it's probably okay for you to go. And the moment I thought that, she rose up out of her body and stood in the air above the gurney. And she had this perfect form that was still almost as if it was a physical form, but it was like in the absolute prime of her existence. She had the appearance of about half the age of the physical body she'd just come out of. And she filled me with light and love and gratitude. She was so grateful. And then she left. She thanked me for what I'd done, which seemed like nothing, and then she left. And as I started to leave the room, I heard the physician in charge pronounce her death in military time. And I thought to myself, yeah, I know. I saw her leave. And then I walked out and logged onto my computer, and that's how my day began. Yeah, at that point, it felt pretty natural. Those kind of experiences were still infrequent enough and deeply moving enough that I was always grateful for them. But like I said, I was just starting out my shift and I just went on with my day. But one of the things that impressed me about that and other similar experiences is that the souls of individuals, when they depart this life, they do so with love and gratitude. They're always grateful to be acknowledged. And it gave me peace about the people that depart mortality, that they're happy about where they're going and that they're calm and content and grateful. I believe it was a November day. There was snow on the ground. I went into a room to see a patient. He was wearing several layers of clothing, trying to stay warm because he was without a home at the time. He had a long, scruffy hair and an unkempt beard. He struggled with substance abuse. He had holes in his shoes and holes in his socks, and he'd been out walking around in the snow for a long time, which is really, really hard on feet. We looked at each other. I introduced myself, I'm sure, but I don't think we said much else because we both knew what needed to be done. I filled a wash basin with warm water and squirted some soap in it and grabbed a wash rag, and I sat down at the foot of the gurney. He just kind of looked at me with a bit of trepidation. I carefully took off his shoes and I took off the last threads of his socks, and I proceeded to wash his feet. And something profound happened. Everything that was temporal or physical or mortal about that soul was drawn aside, and I saw who he was. And I was in the presence of the divine. I couldn't say that for a long time. I was in the presence of God, and I'm not using hyperbole. I went into the room thinking that I was going to serve this individual, and I learned that he was there ministering to me, teaching me who I was by showing me who he was. He was the antithesis of everything the world defines as success, and yet he was divine. I have thought about every soul I have encountered since that day differently, because that's who we're next to, always. Whether we're sitting in the pews of a church or in the gutter, the person next to us is God, and that's who we are as well. It's hard for us to acknowledge who we are or what we are, especially when we look at ourselves. Sometimes if we're around people that are really compassionate, loving, caring people, we can see their divinity. But it's hard to see it in ourselves. The hardest place to see God is in the mirror. And yet, that's what we're here to come to understand and to realize, and then we can treat each other the way we should. There was one other person in the emergency department that knew I had these kind of experiences. She's chosen to remain anonymous, but she's a nurse, and in my book I call her Rachel. The only way she got me to talk about my experiences was she shared some of hers with me, and they were just so moving. I was moved to tears listening to what she told me, and that kind of broke me down a bit, and I told her about some of my experiences. So she was aware that I had these kinds of experiences, and one evening we got word that a patient was being flown in from about 200 miles away, had been in a really severe car crash. He had a lot of bad injuries. His wife and his 14-month-old son had died at the scene of the accident. And there was another emergency physician. The whole trauma team was there waiting for him. I wasn't even going to go in the room, but this nurse came and grabbed me by the arm, and she insisted I come to the trauma room. And I asked her why, and she said, because she's there. I said, who's there? What are you talking about? She said, his wife, she's there. And she drugged me down to the trauma room. And when I went into the trauma room, this patient was on the gurney, not moving, unconscious, surrounded by medical providers, and standing above him in the air was his wife, his deceased wife, whose physical remains were still 200 miles away. I knew instantly who she was. It was as if I'd known her forever. And everything slowed down. It was like time slowed down for me. Everybody else in the room kept doing their jobs, but for me it got very quiet, like a television program with the sound turned off. And she expressed her gratitude for the care her husband was receiving. I walked over to the gurney and I looked down at him, and I felt the pulse in his foot because he had a badly injured leg, and I knew instantly that he was going to lose the leg. And as I looked down at him, I could still see his wife standing behind me in the air, because I could see in all directions at the same time. It felt like all my priorities in life reordered. It wasn't the first time that had happened, mind you, but each time I had these profound experiences, it felt like everything that really mattered came to the forefront, and everything else faded away. The experience was fairly brief. We sent Jeff, that's his name, we sent him off to the ICU or the OR. I took off my gown and my shoe covers and went back out into the department and finished my shift, and never expected to see him again. But a month later, this same nurse came and grabbed me by the arm, and against my wishes, drugged me up to his hospital room, insisting that we had to tell him what we experienced in the emergency department, because she saw and experienced the same thing. She experienced the presence of Jeff's wife in the emergency department. And so we went up to his hospital room. She shared what had happened. He looked at me, and I nodded and acknowledged that I'd experienced it too. And that validated him enough that he opened up and told us about his out-of-body near-death experience at the scene of the accident. It's been 27 years since I met Jeff in the emergency department. We're fast friends. For 20 of those years, he invited me to talk publicly about my experience, and I declined, but in the last several years, we now frequently share that experience together and talk about it publicly. When I first went to see him after his accident, I had on cowboy boots and blue jeans and a bull riding belt buckle from my teenage days. Unbeknownst to me, he grew up in a neighboring county. He rode bareback bronc horses, and when he saw my jeans and boots and belt buckle, he figured he could trust me. I left him with my personal phone number, and we've been friends and growing and learning together and sharing ever since. I was getting a lot of pressure to share more. Even after I wrote my book, some of my friends were pressuring me to talk and share more, and I felt pressure from some divine place, some place bigger than me, pressuring me to share more. And I remember one day hearing this timid voice in my mind say, "But what if my message isn't good enough?" And then I heard the voice that's guided me for decades say, "It's not your message," which I thought was a good ego check. A few weeks later, something woke me in the middle of the night. I couldn't go back to sleep. After an hour or two, I finally asked, I said, "Why did you wake me?" And the voice said, "I've been giving you messages. Why aren't you sharing them?" And then I began to realize that a lot of the experiences I have aren't for me. Some are for me, and some are just too sacred to talk about. But most of the experiences that I have are to help other people. And they can't be benefited if I don't share. So I started sharing. That's when I started writing the blog posts on my website, sharing some of the experiences that I've had and some that other people have shared with me and given me permission to share. A messenger told me one day, said, "Every experience is to enable you to help someone else." I said, wait a minute. I thought experiences were for personal growth. And the messenger, figuratively, if you will, shook his head and said, "The primary purpose of every experience is to enable you to help someone else. You get the secondary benefit of personal growth." What we're here for is to gain empathy. Because when we have empathy for other souls, all judgment stops, and there's only love. And that's what we're trying to learn. One of my most recent experiences occurred just about 8 months ago. My 32-year-old daughter was at the peak of her profession as a neonatal flight nurse. She had a very loving husband and 2 wonderful children. And she was suddenly diagnosed with lung cancer. Very health-conscious individual with no risk factors, and she had stage 4 lung cancer, and she survived just 6 months. She passed away 9 months ago. About a month after she passed away, on a beautiful sunny Sunday morning, I was laying on my bed, and the sun was streaming through the doorway into the room. My wife was somewhere else in the house. I was all alone. And my daughter walked into the bedroom, just as comfortably and nonchalantly and with the most beautiful signature smile as any day that she was ever alive. She just walked in. In the last 6 months of her life, her tumor was so big and so metabolically active, she was always hot, and she had to have her hair up in a bun and have a fan around her neck to try and stay cool. But when she walked into my bedroom that day, she had this long, beautiful auburn hair, and it was down over her shoulders. It reminded me of the day she got married, before she went to the wedding venue and had her hair done up. And she looked at me for a few moments, and I silently asked her, I said, "Do you have a message for me?" And she answered back. She said, "I love you, Dad. I'll always love you." So I'm grateful for the profound experiences that I've had, some of which probably prepared me to have that experience with my own daughter. I know that we continue to exist, that we continue to live, that we continue, most importantly, to love. I recently published a novel, and I wrote it as a novel intentionally, although it's richly informed by my experience in the emergency department. It's about an emergency physician, an academically oriented, left-brained physician who only believes in what he can see and measure and repeat, if you will, replicate. His adult daughter is the inciting event in the book when she suddenly dies. Her name is Zen. And I wrote this 2 or 3 years ago. I remember the day I wrote it. The main character's name is Solace Murphy. It's an Irish name. And he's talking to his wife a few years after Zen's death. And he's just overwhelmed with emotion. And he looks at his wife and he said, "God, I love that kid." And I remember when I wrote that line, I broke down and I cried. I couldn't understand why it impacted me so deeply, why it felt so personal. And it was about 3 months later, my jaw just dropped open because I remembered the book. And I remembered Solace and Zen. And I just thought, how could I have written that? And I thought, my soul must have known. And when I went back and read the book, I saw traces of Rachel all over in it that I had never anticipated or intentionally written. And some of it helped me in the process of grieving her passing. My daughter was diagnosed on her 32nd birthday. And I was in the hospital all night with her. I went home that morning to shower and change clothes and see my wife. And from that moment, we lived in gratitude because Rachel was with us for 32 years, and then she was with us another 6 months. And we cherished every day. We lived and we loved and we made memories. We gathered as a family. Didn't get anything like that with my brother when he passed. We got a visit from a family member to tell us. A lot of people get a phone call. They don't get any warning. We were so grateful for that 6 months. We were grateful for the medical expertise that kept her from suffering and enabled her to enjoy almost all of that time. We were grateful for her children that we see a lot now. We're grateful for her loving husband. We learned that no matter how bad things get, there is always something to be grateful for. And on more than one occasion, Rachel, I don't know exactly what experiences she had, but she told my wife and I and her husband if she could go back and change it, she wouldn't. She had a knowledge that she was on her path and that things were proceeding as they should. For me, they're virtually synonymous. A spirit, a soul, the essence, consciousness. For me, a soul is that sentient part of us that exists from eternity to eternity, that existed long before we were born, that occupies our physical form now and continues to exist after physical death. I think we all have known each other throughout that span. Some of the messengers or the angels, the guardians that people talk about that come to assist us here, knew us before we were born. Some of them knew us before they passed on, and now they're coming back to help us because they've trod the path that we're on. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that some souls or angels are currently inhabiting physical form and come and help us in our life when we need it the most. The soul is what we are. It's what exists and grows and learns and loves and cares and interacts with others. There are as many opinions about why we're here as there are people that you might ask the question to. Many of the answers that I resonate with is that we come here to live, to love, to learn, to grow, to experience. Most importantly, I think, we came because we chose to come. I think choice is the sovereign principle of our existence. And I heard one person say, and I liked the way they said it, that we came from love. And we came to experience everything that's not love and to try and find that love again. And it's a struggle sometimes in this existence to find love and to experience it and to share it. And we look forward to going home to love again. I have a dear friend. She's a young attorney in Tel Aviv. She had a near-death experience when she was going into surgery. She left her body. She said the love she felt when she left her body was as if someone had gathered all the love that every mother felt for her child, past, present, or future, and gathered it in one place, and then refined and distilled it into its purest essence and injected it into her soul as she left her body. I love that description. I think it gets right at the core of what we are. What is God? Do I want to tackle that? I hinted at it earlier when I talked about my experience with the homeless man when I washed his feet. He was God. But he was teaching me that I'm God. And that's too big for most people. It's anathema for most religious traditions, at least Western Judeo-Christian traditions. It fits more comfortably, though, with some Eastern philosophies. We are divine emanations of divine progenitors. And like our progenitors, we have that capacity to be what they are. Or perhaps more accurately, we already are what they are. And we're just coming to realize it. We're trying to remember. We're on a divine path with a divine destiny. And that path goes through mortality for reasons we don't fully understand. But being mortal does not make us less divine. And rising up to fill the measure of creation and become like your Creator is not anathema. It's not blasphemous. It's not disrespectful. Recognizing who you are does not diminish God at all. I know a lot of people don't agree with that, but that's kind of how I feel about God. Heaven is every time you have a moment where you recognize who you are and why you're here. And you get this confirmation of your path. Some people describe it as goosebumps or a tingling. Some people talk about feeling spirit in their soul or feeling one with the universe or one with creation. Every time you have one of those moments, in my opinion, that's heaven. Being aware of that, every moment you are aware of that, you're on your path. Your presence in this instance is your path. That's heaven. And we look forward to a time where we can experience it more and more. And experiencing it more means some effort on our part. It means being aware. It means opening ourselves up to it. It means asking a question and being willing to receive an answer. It's about taking a moment to pause and be aware of those around us, of their needs, being compassionate. All of that is heaven. The antithesis of heaven might be distraction. We're so distracted from things that matter. We spend so much time earning money and gathering things. I had a friend who said that the measure of success is more stuff in a bigger tough shed. That's where we spend too much of our time. Heaven is being in the present, in the moment, in the now. For my personal experience, the most important thing our soul wants us to know is who we are. I asked a friend of mine once, if God came to you tonight and told you that everything you could ever hope for and imagine about heaven and your destiny was a sure thing, it was all guaranteed, what would you do different tomorrow? And he thought for a long time, and he finally answered and he said, I'd keep doing the same things I'm doing now. Because when we truly realize who we are, then we spend our days doing what we are. And most of the time what we are is helping others. Once we understand our own identity, then we shift to trying to help other people realize who they are. I asked one morning in meditation, I said, what's my errand today? And the voice that spoke to me that morning said simply, tell your wife you love her. That was not an easy thing for me, not because I didn't love her, but because of the death of my brother way back in my childhood. I put this big wall up around my heart. I wasn't going to let anything in my life that I cared enough about that it could hurt me when it was gone, including people. And so it was really hard for me to tell people I loved them, even the people that I was closest to that I really loved. And that was the errand I received that morning. And I went and I talked with my wife and I told her I loved her. And she was nearly in tears. It was that day for some reason that she needed to hear it. That's what our soul needs to realize is who we are. And that's what they want to tell us is who we are so that we can act accordingly.